Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm Eileen Galuli, and it's my pleasure and privilege as the Executive Director for the Society of Fellows and Heyman Center for the Humanities at Columbia University to welcome you to tonight's event. As you know, it's called A New Chapter, Women Writing Northern Ireland Now. In just a moment, I'm going to hand over the proceedings to Nick Quaife, who is the head of cultural affairs at the Consulate General of Ireland in New York, here in New York. But before I do, I'd like to thank all the many folks who have made this event possible, including our partners at NYU, Villanova, Georgetown, as well as the Dart Center for Journalism and Trauma here at Columbia, who made this room possible, as well as all the tech. And particularly to my staff at the SOF Heyman, so Lindsay Stram, Erin Fay, and Sylvia Jindick. Tonight's event is the first of a multi-city 10-day program that was first imagined by Helena Nolan, the Consul General of Ireland here in New York, and responsible for the East Coast, other consulates. And she first brought the idea to the rest of us in March, I think it was, of this year. So we're honored and delighted to be able to launch this collaboration tonight here. And Nick Quaife, to whom I'm going to turn over the proceedings in just 2 seconds, will tell you more about the event, and will introduce the moderators for tonight's discussion. Thank you.
Hi. I'm Nick, Head of Cultural Affairs here based in New York, with responsibility for promoting culture for the Irish government across the US. I know Helena would love to be here tonight, but she had a family emergency, so sends her regrets. But I know I'm speaking for her when I say how great it is to see so many of you here on a post-Thanksgiving Monday, which speaks to the popularity and the interest in our writers and our topic. So great to see so many of you, and great, Eileen, thank you for letting us come to you with this idea. And it does take a village to pull these ideas together, and as well as many of the partners that Eileen mentioned, we're delighted to have the Northern Ireland Bureau as one of our partners, and Andrew Elliott is here tonight. This project, Women Writing Northern Ireland Now, has some links back to a Booker Prize winner, Anna Burns, in 2018 with Milkman, and an article that was read by Helena and by myself about a northern wave of an incredible amount of young women writing fiction, non-fiction, poetry, and I think it listed like 30-something writers in that article. And really, we could have invited every single one of those writers, but we're delighted that we were able to pull from their busy schedules Lucy, Jan, and Michelle, and have them come here. And then we kind of thought, well, it's great to bring the writers to one event at Columbia, but what about we bring them to several events? And so there's an incredible amount of Irish studies and academic programs that focus on Irish literature across the East Coast. So partnering with Northern Ireland Bureau, being able to go to Georgetown and Villanova, St. Joseph's, Syracuse University, Boston College, and say, hey, what do you think about this idea? And they'd all said, yes, we've been thinking about that too, this incredible amount of great writing by Northern Irish writers. So we came together and we said, let's do this new chapter. So that was one of the goals, but of course doing it in this year of 2023, when it's the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement, added another element to why it was important to do this now. And I'm sure that the writers and the moderators will touch on themes to do with GFA 25, its successes, its lets downs, all those kind of things. And then we thought, well, what else can we add to this? And we thought, well, what about helping the writers get US publishing deals so their books can be bought here? And I'm delighted to say that all 3 writers have US publishing representation. Now their books are available for sale at the end of tonight, and they will be in all bookstores in the coming months. So we're really thrilled that we're not able to help the writers get more audiences for their books, but really to continue sort of beating the drum of how great this crop of writers are. So it really is an honor to introduce them tonight, and I'm going to not speak about the writers, but I am going to introduce you to the moderators who will do that. So at the top of the room we have Stephanie McCurry, who's a professor of history at Columbia University. She specializes in the American Civil War and Reconstruction in 19th century United States, the American South, and the history of women and gender. She's a native of Belfast, and McCurry explores in her recent work the comparative history of post-war societies. And she's also the author of the Pulitzer Prize finalist, The Confederate Reckoning. So please look out for that. Keelan Hughes, one of the first writers I met on this job, also an Irish writer who did spend time in Belfast, so she has earned her space on this stage tonight, but she's a Cullman Fellow here at the Columbia University. She's the author of Orchard and the Wasp, which won the Collier-Bristow Prize, and was long-listed for the International Dublin Literary Award, and the Wild Laughter, which won the Royal Society of Literature's Encore Award, and long-listed for the International Dylan Thomas Prize. She was recently the Oscar Wilde Centre Fellow at Trinity College in Dublin, and she has a new book coming out in April called The Alternatives. So I'm going to hand you over now to these very competent writers who I'm grateful to have here. Thank you.
Hey, everybody. So happy to see you all here and to welcome these three amazing authors to Columbia. It has fallen on me to introduce two of them. First, Lucy Caldwell in the center, who was born in Belfast, is the author of 4 novels, several stage plays and radio dramas, and 2 collections of short stories, with another coming in 2004. She has won numerous awards for her work, including the Rooney Prize for Irish Literature, the Dylan Thomas Prize, and BBC National Short Story Award as well. She was elected a Fellow of the Royal Academy of Literature in 2018, and in 2022 was the recipient of the EM Forster Award from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. On her left is Michelle Gallen, who also was born in Northern Ireland in the mid-1970s and grew up during the Troubles, a few miles from the border between what she was told was the Free State and the United Kingdom. We'll have to have a wee talk about that, because I still call it the Free State, and I don't know why. Maybe you can explain that to me. She studied English literature at Trinity College, Dublin. Her debut novel, Big Girl, Small Town, was shortlisted for the Costa First Novel Award, and her critically acclaimed second novel, Factory Girls, won the Comedy Women in Print Award, very, very well deserved, and was shortlisted for the RSL Encore Award. Both of her books are being adapted for television.
Thanks, Stephanie. And I'm going to introduce, last but not least, Jan Carson, who is a writer and community arts facilitator, and I'm very biased in this, but an absolutely wonderful human being. Her first book, Malcolm Orange Disappears, came out in 2014, and she followed that with a short story collection and Children's Children, which I think is going to be reissued next year, and 2 micro story collections called Postcard Stories. Her second novel, The Firestarters, I'm going to come back to in a minute, so I won't mention that just now, but it should be available at the back, as should her most recent novel, The Raptures, which was shortlisted for the An Post Novel of the Year Award, which is basically our Pulitzer, and the Kerry Group Novel of the Year. And importantly, her short story collection, Quickly, While They Still Have Horses, is going to come out in the US in July. So, with intros out of the way, just to reiterate what Eileen and Nick were saying, thanks so much to the Society of Fellows and the Heyman Centre for the Humanities for hosting us, and to the Dart Centre, to Eileen Galuli here at Columbia, who's done such wonderful work in organising this, and all of those supporting the event, from the Glucksmith Ireland House at NYU, the NI Bureau, and the Consulate General of Ireland, Helen Nolan and Nick Quaife. So I'm from Galway, but I studied in Belfast, so I was a blow-in. And this sort of event is the type of thing that when I was there, when I was on the island in general, I didn't really see happening back in the day. And I felt sure that it should be happening and that there should be whole island, pollination, which really, really was not happening at the time. It's hard to stress, apart from a couple of exceptions, certain poets and maybe a couple of playwrights. It didn't seem to be happening in the land of fiction. So it's bloody brilliant to see it happening now, and especially great to see it happening in this kind of context with such a wonderful audience. Thank you so much for coming out. It takes, as Nick said, a lot of people to put something like this together with so much will and enthusiasm. And in my experience in the book world, there's no industry involved. It comes down to people, very good ones. So on very good people, Jan Carson. Sorry for the bias. The others are also wonderful people, but I know Jan a little better. So I'm going to start with you. The Fire Starters, which was the novel before last, it won the EU Prize for Literature. And so it's been translated into many, many languages. And that novel was set in Belfast over a summer heat wave known as the 12th of July in Belfast. I don't know if there's a hands up how many people in the room know what the 12th of July refers to. Well, a good percentage of the audience, but for any, maybe Jan can touch on it a little. But her latest novel, The Raptures, isn't set in a big city. It's not set in Belfast. It's set in a small town, closer to home, I believe. So I was wondering if you could introduce us to the book and to one of its central characters, which is the town of Ballylack.
I'm going to stand up so I can see the whites of your eyes a wee bit closer. First of all, it's really lovely to be here, and thank you for all emerging from your Thanksgiving stupor to come and listen to us tonight. I hope this is going to be fun and entertaining and educational and all sorts of things, but for us it is just an absolute delight to be here, and we're very, very grateful for the welcome. I'm going to read a very short section from The Raptures. As Kaylin graciously mentioned, it is situated close to home. There's no one in this room tonight who knows my mother, so I can tell you that the fictional village of Ballylack is actually Kells, where I grew up, just outside Ballymena. I grew up there in the 1980s in a fundamentalist Presbyterian household, so if you can imagine Ian Paisley, it was very similar to that. So no dancing, no drinking, no cinema, not much crack. This book is set in 1993. It follows Hannah, who is basically me, an 11-year-old girl, as a kind of wave of illnesses sweep through the local primary school, and the children one by one begin to die. All of them except Hannah, and Hannah believes that's because her parents love Jesus, so she's okay. Saying all of that in mind, it's hard sell trying to launch a book about Presbyterians' children dying in the middle of a pandemic. So my editor has told me to keep saying that it's also quite a funny book. I think this section is very short. I'm just going to introduce you to Ballylack. I'll apologise because I do go a bit Ballymena, so you might have to tune in to that a little. You're going to meet Ross, who's the first kid to die in this wave. Ross had only just turned 11. He was still a child, though the thought of girls was already pressing. He'd sometimes go through the K's catalogue for pictures of women in bras and pants. He'd yet to touch a girl himself, had yet to taste coffee or travel anywhere in an aeroplane. He'd been looking forward to Lanzarote. It would have been his first time in a foreign place. Poor Ross. It's never easy going first. There's been no talk of the boys passing yet. It'll be mid-morning before the news spreads. In the houses and farms of Ballylack, people are getting on with their everyday doing. They're feeding the cows and drinking tea, watching the telly and heading to bed. There's no expectation that tomorrow will be much different from today. 93 has been an unremarkable year, and the summer's shaping up to be equally forgettable. It's neither hot nor particularly damp. It isn't a World Cup year or one for the Olympics. Major's in Downing Street, Clinton's in the White House. Folks aren't sure what to make of him. Keep an eye on that one. He's got notions, they like to say. There's talk of Clinton wading into the troubles. Word is, he thinks he can sort it out. Let the same fella have a run at it. Better than him if tried and failed. Down south, Ireland win the Eurovision for the umpteenth year in a row. In Your Eyes is the song in question. You'd have a hard time dancing to it, but it's got a catchy hook. Makes a change from the usual earnest shite, plonk, 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 and words about peace. What are the young ones listening to? Shaggy, Ace of Base, Too Unlimited, feel-good Euro hits. They don't sound half so feel-good pumping through the tinny speakers of the GAA clubs and community centres where Ulster's youth hang out. Dancing, smoking, drinking cheap vodka decanted into Fanta bottles. No, no limits, we'll reach for the sky, the youngsters sing, fists pumping furiously to the beat, black bomber jackets soaking up their sweat. They go buck mad every time No Limits comes on. Sure, it's only a tune to them, not the call to arms it could be. No limits indeed. What a load of bollocks. These kids hail from Aucher, Clocher and Cullibaggy. Say it out loud. Cullibaggy. You can practically hear the fences. They couldn't be more limited if they tried. Elsewhere in the province, they're still at it, killing each other with bombs and guns. It's the 23rd or 4th summer of this nonsense. Depends on when you start at keeping count. Most folks are fed up with the whole thing. They're adamant the killing must stop. There's war in Bosnia and Afghanistan. There's a brutal one winding up in Rwanda. You can't turn on your telly for seeing dead bodies piled everywhere, blood pooling in the gutters, women howling and getting on. The people here are sick of death. This isn't a third world country. This is Britain. Or this is Ireland. Or both. Or neither. Or its own institution, peculiar as a maiden aunt. Either way, it's a civilised country. It's been a whole 2 years since McDonald's arrived.
Thanks so much, Jan. Just before I move along to Michelle, your book is set, as you just said, in 93, and you've said it's an unremarkable year. Why did you set it in 93?
A couple of reasons. One, because I'm really lazy and didn't want to do any research, and that's the first year that I remember quite clearly. Two, because 93 in Northern Ireland, the peace process was just beginning to actually feel like something might take hold and work. So there was a kind of degree of optimism, and I wanted to write something about what it was like to be a young person then. But most importantly, I think 93 was before the internet kicked in, and it was also, I mean, this sounds banal, but it was before the advent of EasyJet and cheap air flights. So it was still possible then to be a child like Hannah, living in a small isolated community with no idea that there were people in the world doing things differently from her community. And after the internet kicked in, it was impossible to kind of write like that. So my world growing up was incredibly sheltered. I didn't know that anybody was doing things differently. We couldn't afford flights to go to Barcelona or Paris or London to find that out. So I wanted to write into that ignorance in a way.
That's really interesting. And Factory Girls by Michelle Gallen is set in the summer of 1994. So you could buy all the books and read them in chronological order. So it's a very different setting. It's not just the shift in time and also what that signifies, but there's also a shift in place. And I'm going to ask you to do a reading, and I'll come back to place after the reading. But just before we hear a wee section, I wonder if you could speak to the choice of the summer of 94. Was it similar to Jan's reasoning?
Oh, I mean, I love my research. But 94, the summer of 94 is the summer of the ceasefire. And actually, unlike Jan, we didn't believe at all there was going to be a ceasefire or peace or any of that. And even after there was a ceasefire, we didn't believe there was a ceasefire. And I think it was 2 years ago before I really internalized that the troubles were over. And I can remember where I was and somebody saying, it was a therapy group, trauma therapy group. And this guy, like Frank, my anxiety counselor, he stopped, we Zoom call, and he stopped and he goes, Michelle, the troubles are over. And nobody had said that to me. And I'd never believed in any of this. And it was just this big moment in my life where I suddenly went, oh my God, I've been living like it might all blow up tomorrow kind of a thing. So 94 was a big deal because in the book, it's 3 girls who've left school. They're waiting on their A-level results. They've all applied to really good universities, but they're not going to get in until they know that they've got the grades. And in the meantime, they decide to take a job in the factory in the town. And I chose 94, because it was just before the Britpop kind of exploded across everything, before the Spice Girls, before Oasis. Oasis and Blur were around, but there wasn't the huge competition. And it was this summer where paramilitary's kind of new piece was coming, and they went into a bit of a sort of, well, we might as well shoot people while we can sort of spiral. So a lot of really hard stuff happened that summer, but I can also remember the summer I worked in the shirt factory as being this kind of really powerful experience, because I grew up in a really small town. Like, I'm the small town person as well, but in my town, you know, you just didn't meet the other side. Like, you know, sometimes you'd find out like a Protestant's name after they'd been blown up or something. You know, you'd see them on the TV and go, that's your man that you might have seen for 15 years in your town, but you only learned who they were when they ended up being a statistic. So yeah, complex time, place, exciting, full of hope and potential, but also a place that can kind of drag you down.
There's so much energy in the book, and it's absolutely hilarious. I would love if you would be so kind as to do a reading.
Okay. I feel that's really high up. Can you hear me? Yeah. Let me just see if I've got the right bit. No, I've gone and lost my wee bit I was gonna do. I had a bit, let me see. This is a wee bit, I don't know, food's a big deal to me, and food's a big deal at home. Earlier on I did a wee reading about spaghetti bolognese. So this one here is about Maeve going home. She's kind of like moved out of home, she's got a flat, she's totally independent, so she thinks, but every now and then she has to go home. So she's leaving her flat where she lives with her friend Caroline. Caroline was going for a drive up to the TV mast outside Strabane. Martin's such a dote. I said I'd only ever seen the red light at the top of the mast, and he said, come on then, I'll take you up. And he's as good as his word. He's taken me up the leg for Drum this evening to watch the sunset. Maeve had waved them off, pure annoyed, had been left to make her own tea. In the end, she decided to head over home to see if she could scrounge some fish fingers. And she ducked into the shop and she picked up some Mr. Kipling's French fancies so she wouldn't arrive with her two arms the one length. And then she let herself in at the door. "Lo! Come on in, Maeve. Sarah's here." Oh, Maeve's heart sank. Sarah McCanny, the owl scrounge. She would have already hoovered up the last of the fish fingers. And right enough, when Maeve put her head around the door, there Sarah was, lying up on the sofa, eating a fish finger. Lord God, now, but it's hard to beat a good fish finger. Well, the telly was off, you see, because Sarah was of that generation that couldn't manage to chat shite and watch shite at the same time. Well, now your luck's in this evening, Sarah, for it looks like our Maeve has brought dessert and all. Sarah flashed her NHS dentures at Maeve. Would they be French fancies? Nothing like a wee French fancy. Maeve nodded at Sarah as she edged her way to the kitchen, clutching her bag. And are you putting the kettle on there too, Maeve? I'll have a wee cup of tea. Me too. Sure, we might as well put the pot on and bring cups in for everyone. Your father's over at Toot's place helping out with those bikes. He'll not be back till late. Sure thing, called Maeve, clenching her jaw. Are there any waffles left? No, love, we had the last of the waffles. There's plenty of white slice there, though, and you can get some of them crisps in if you want a wee sandwich. Oh, lovely, thanks. Maeve, like everyone else in her house, had to be on her best behaviour when Sarah was over, for she reported the manners of every house she visited all around the town. Sure, you wouldn't believe the hoo-ha that was over in the Dolans last Wednesday, and all over the head of a tin of sardines. She went into the kitchen in a pure rage and she fired the French fancies onto the worktop, and then she unplugged the kettle and slung it in under the tap, all the time seething at the wee roundy belly on Sarah, who hadn't made her own tea since the 1982, when her only husband had been arrested at Manchester Polytechnic and been given 3 concurrent life sentences for running a bomb factory. Now, something everybody knew he was innocent of, for as his own father said in his defence, though Dermot had a face for modelling a balaclava, he hadn't the wit to run a piss up in an Irish bar, never mind manufacture and distribute bombs from a bedsit in Cheetham Hill. Since then, Sarah had saved every penny she had for her seasonal coach and ferry trips to an English jail. Maeve knew
Maeve knew feeding Sarah her tea every day and donating a few quid to have pictures of Dermot printed on t-shirts and posters was her community's way of supporting the family through this miscarriage of justice. But it didn't take the edge off her hunger or her rage. She plugged the kettle in, flicked it on, and then she buttered a couple of slices of bread, bust open the packet of cheese and onion potato crisps, made herself a wee sandwich. She doled out milk and sugar into 5 mugs, and then she made a big pot of tea and brought everything through to the living room on a tray. Sarah beamed at Maeve when she left the pot in front of the fire to brew. Aren't you the queer cuddy now, a great help to your mammy, even though you've left home? Och, now sure I'd do anything for Mam. Her mam scowled over as if to say, if you lay it on too thick, you'll suffocate in it. Maeve showed Chris, her brother, who was facing down at Sarah's end of the sofa. So tell us this now, Sarah says. Are you still in Dawn Factory? Maeve braced herself for an interrogation as intense as anything the Brits had put Sarah's son through over in London. I am, I. God, now, isn't it great these days with the opportunities you young ones get, huh? Imagine now, a factory job in the town. Sarah shook her head in wonder while Maeve's mam sucked a fag out. The tay'll be ready now, Paul, Maeve said, and Paul made a face. But he got up to pour, and Sarah watched Maeve take a bite of her sandwich. What's that you're having now? Is it a wee crisp sandwich? Maeve nodded, holding the sandwich close, for Sarah wasn't above asking for a bite. You'll fade away to nothing now if you don't have something more substantial than that for your tea, Sarah clucked as Paul handed the mugs round. So, it's not long now to the results, eh? Sarah said, as if the end of the world was nigh. Maeve shook her head, for it was hard to talk with a mouthful of potato and sliced pan. Her mam glared at her for being so rude. Nah, she'll get when you get your results when? This week? She gets them mid-August, like every year, Chris said, as if he'd acquired a keen interest in exam schedule since starting his GCSEs. 2 weeks, eh? Sarah said. And what's the plans then? Heading over the water, are you? Maeve dreaded this bit. She knew the drill, for Deirdre, her sister, had gone through it before her. All the neighbours had asked her what she was going to study, and she said media studies, and they looked at her blankly, so Deirdre had tried to explain what media studies was and what job she'd be qualified in the end. But after she stopped talking, they avoided her eyes and would say to her mum, well, now, with the help of God, she could surely convert to the teaching after she's finished the media studies. Brainy children, like families like the Murrays, were supposed to aim for steady careers that had raised the stock of the whole family. Medicine, law, dentistry, accountancy, or teaching. Careers that had land a marriage, a mortgage, and bring the whole family up a rung up the ladder. Nobody knew where in hell you'd end up after doing media studies.
I did tell you it was hilarious. Lucy Caldwell, who's in the beautiful red dress in the middle here. I'm starting off by talking about timing and place, and the two most recent books are set in very different times and also in different places. These Days, the novel I see on your lap, which is very excitingly coming out in the US 2025.
That's right, spring 25.
Very exciting. It's set in 1941 in Belfast during the Blitz, which is possibly something you didn't know had happened. I think a lot of people aren't aware that there was a Blitz in Belfast. So it's a lesser known story, which I think is a commonality across your writing. It's of course a family story as well, and it's a story about being in a city under duress, being marginalised in the narrative, and it's obviously an internationally recognisable moment right now, I think. But then the latest collection of stories, Intimacies, is very contemporary. It could be set, last year, the year before. Most of the stories, I think, are very contemporary. Elements of the historical sneak in, like there's a story called Words for Things, where Monica Lewinsky comes up as an example of women who are being talked about as laughingstocks. where the narrator starts to realize that they're very far from that. I think that actually is a memory in that story, and in real time the protagonist is sending photos of her children on the family WhatsApp. So again, kind of contemporary, always up against those kind of fragments of history. And then there's a story called Jars of Clay, where there's American kids who are flying to Ireland to under the stewardship of a guy called Pastor Rick, to campaign against female bodily autonomy. And that should be more historical than it is. So is it fair to say that you are drawn more frequently to write about the contemporary?
Thank you. That is such a good question. I think this is my first historical novel that follows, say, the Waverley Rule, Sir Walter Scott, you know, 'tis 60 years hence. But I think that I never, and I would say this is, you've heard the same for Jan and Michelle, you cannot write into a sort of generic past. You know, if I'm writing a story set in Belfast in 2003, I have to think, okay, so what size were mobile phones? You know, had they shrunk till they were the size of credit cards and they could shrink no further, so they started to get big again, you know? Or how did we navigate the city? Did we have A to Z, or was Google Maps a thing? Or so you're always trying to capture precisely those details of how we lived. And I think especially if you're writing Belfast, you don't have a hope of capturing the city unless you know exactly where in time you are and what's going on. There's a website that was brilliant website run by the University of Ulster that I'm sure lots of you are familiar with, called CAIN, C-A-I-N, the Conflict Archive on the internet. And it just lists, you know, every day for the duration of the Troubles, what's happening. And so I think that sort of accuracy and specificity is really interesting for me. The story that you mentioned that uses Monica Lewinsky, the story is called Words for Things, and there's a line in that story that says, there were things that we didn't know were things because there were no words for them. And in that story, my experience of having a child is that suddenly you are a member of a different generation. I didn't think you have to have a child to feel this, but suddenly when you're thinking about, you know, the ways that you were raised, and you're kind of questioning your blueprints, you know, and the ways that you were raised and the things that you took for granted and the ways that you want to raise your child and different things. The women in that story are remembering the ways that they were raised. They're remembering certain figures who are prominent in public life and are newly feeling appalled by the way those women were treated. That's really interesting. I had thought that you were going to read from Intimacies, but it seems like you're going to read from These Days. Wonderful. I think. I will. I mean, I can read. I suppose I was going to read from These Days. Actually,
yeah, go for it. So
I think the commonality is I'm always interested in you know, women's stories, undertold stories really, which quite often tend to be women's stories. And it's interesting here, I think one of the most phenomenal writers and thinkers for our time, she's based at Columbia, it's Professor Saidiya Hartman, who Venus in Two Acts is her most famous essay, Wayward Lives, Beautiful Experiments. She is a writer and thinker who I think she's just phenomenal, and she's redefining what it's possible to do, how it's possible to read the archives, you know, how you can use the conditional tense with an aesthetic and a moral imperative to tell stories that are not otherwise possible to be told. And the extract that I'm going to read from, it's a very small self-contained extract of a young servant girl set in the Blitz. And the Belfast Blitz was between April to May 1941, one of the worst blitzes across the whole of the UK. And it's very unknown, it's very undertold. I was researching it as COVID swept in, and I was asking people on the phone, you know, what were your memories of the Blitz? Because it's still within living memory. I was still speaking to people who had been children in the Blitz, and they would say, you know, oh, love, I've got nothing to tell you. And then they would tell you the sort of details that you don't tend to find in historical archives. You know, Garcia Marquez has a thing where he says, in journalism, one erroneous fact is enough for the whole house of cards to crumble. But as a novelist, what you're looking for is a one fact that's going to bring a whole story, a character to life. And so I suppose in keeping with Professor Hartman's philosophy, that's something of what I was doing. So I'll read, this is just a very short extract. I'll walk up to the podium. Can you hear me? Yeah. No, yes, no, better. The little servant girl is called Betty Binks, and she's 14. She supports her whole family. She doesn't make it through the Blitz. Wee Betty Binks then, gone, along with her dreams of growing taller, her ambitions to take over the running of the big house, to take possessions of the hand-me-downs and the excess jars of preserves and veg. Gone her apron and cap and bobby pins, and gone her drawer of sticking plaster strips. Gone the chipped enamel pudding basin that her ma would send them out with for a block of ice cream on a Sunday from the man come round on his trike. Gone the big oak press, taking up half of the front bedroom where each of them had slept as babies, snug in the bottom drawer. Gone the knitted swimsuits, saggier by each sister, that her ma had made for the annual day trip to Bangor. Gone her treasures, her Sunday school book for good attendance with its coloured plates, the story of Pegasus, the winged horse who fell from the sky, and her sister Clara's Heidi. Gone the big family Bible with the Binks' names written in, going back up past her father to his grandfather, his, which would be hers one day. Gone the look on her dad's face when the great hooting siren would sound out over the docks, and he'd haul himself to the doorway to watch the shipyard workers streaming home, striding easily, laughing and talking, groups of 3 or 4, boots, jackets, flat tweed caps, some for home, some for a swift pint before their dinner, and he'd sit in the doorway in his chair, and they'd raise a hand to him, Evening John, and she'd rest her head against his shoulder and feel how much he missed it all. Gone the time he took her, aged only 7 or 8, to Queen's Island, to the Thompson graving dock, to see where the great ships had been built and launched from, and walking home, they'd stop by the Queen's Quay, the coal quay it was colloquially known, to watch the heaps of dark glittering coal unloaded from the snub-nosed tugboats with their bright red funnels. The bright glinting light on the water, the sudden soot-brick shadows on the arches of the bridge, 2 men rowing a boat underneath. The way he'd pointed to the hazy city beyond the bridge, beyond it the gasworks, smoke tumbling upwards from the tall chimneys, beyond them the hills, and he'd said, "This is your city, Betty, don't let anyone ever tell you otherwise." Gone. Gone the bogey cart her dad made them out of wooden boxes and old pram wheels and a rope. Gone the lamppost with its crossbeam, the old Victorian sort that the lamplighters used to light at dusk, and which she and which all the other children in the street used to swing around, and sometimes, despite herself, she still did. Gone the feel of the lips of the horses in the builder's yard, who would put their big velvety heads down to eat the crust of bread or the handfuls of grass you'd pulled for them, managing to eat it even around the bit in their mouths. Gone the warm breath of your wee sisters as they toddled across the floor and got into bed with you in the night, twisting at a strand of your hair until they fell asleep. Gone the triumph of sailing a paper boat all the way down the gully at the back of the wasteland where the water from the houses ran. Gone, all of it gone, with barely anyone to know or to mark it. Thank you.
It's been amazing reading your books. It's been a couple of months of just enjoying all the things you're writing, talking them over with Keelan. It's been an amazing experience, and for me, fighting nostalgia and all kinds of emotional tsunamis. My mother remembers the Blitz. She remembers where she was taken out of Belfast. I think they were bombing the shipyards, probably. That was why they were bombing Belfast. But in any case, so you've invited a historian to this panel, so it's very hard for me to read what you're writing and not think historically about your books, about the topics that you write on, the way they write on them, the references, the context, but above all about the Troubles, which almost comes to mind immediately when you think about Northern Irish fiction. And my question for all of you, whatever you have to offer in this conversation about it, is what it's like to write creatively about it, but from under what I imagine must be the weight of it. In other words, as a setting, I think the Troubles, which I lived through, part of it too, it provides automatic drama, right? Like the 12th of July, the sides, the whole thing, but it's also inescapably heavy even an over-determining presence. Like, I don't think I would try to write about it. So my question for all of you is, how do you write creatively under the weight of it? How do writers handle it? I've seen various ways of handling it. People move away from it in time. So the sort of ceasefire babies, you're one generation removed, but you're still traumatized by it. I think some authors make it a looming but kind of unspecified danger, like almost an atmospheric. I'm just really curious about what challenges it holds for you, and how you deal with it.
Yeah, okay, so I think the most important thing to say is that the Troubles isn't a monolith. You know, there are as many different experiences of the Troubles as there are people living through them. And the experience, one of the things that I think all writers do is resist the ossification of narrative, is insist on the complexity of different experiences, insist on, things existing that are multiplicitous, that are various, that are simultaneous. And I think that one of the way that the Troubles gets talked about as a sectarian fight doesn't take into account some of the complexities of what it meant to grow up in leafy East Belfast, as opposed to somewhere where you were right on one of the interfaces, one of the peace lines. You know, what it meant to grow up. There are so many different experiences. You know, you look at the way Derry Girls has done. But Derry Girls is a story of the Troubles that approaches the Troubles completely differently from the perspective of what it meant to be a young woman. When you just, the title of my novel these days takes itself from a line by Louis MacNeice in a poem that says, "These days, though lost, will be all your days." And I think there's something there, you know, you think when Lisa McGee's writing Derry Girls, the teenagers, they don't get to put their lives on hold until the Troubles are over and then pick them up. You know, this is what you've got and this is what you live through. So I think one of the things about writing the Troubles is you're writing particular experiences, perhaps.
I think just to follow on from what Lucy said, you know, there are all of these different lenses on, you know, what we see as the Troubles, but I would also say that, you know, the Troubles aren't over. We are living with the implications of it. We're living with a lot of the kind of conditions that caused the conflict to happen in the first place. You know, when we leave Northern Ireland and we tell people that 91% of our schools in Northern Ireland are still segregated, that's a shocking fact, and it shouldn't be sitting at that point 25 years after the Good Friday Agreement. That there's more peace wall in Belfast dividing Catholic neighbourhoods from Protestant neighbourhoods than there was in 1998. I find that shocking. And so, and also things like the mental health implications that have lasted, the trauma that's still there. So to speak of the Troubles as a kind of fixed period that, you know, started in 69, 70 and ended in 1998 is really, really naive. I also wanted to say that I feel like it's a very heavy onus to put on writers that they have to address the conflict. There are a lot of our younger emerging writers who maybe grew up post-98 or just don't want to talk about it. And that's okay as well. Like, I think it's really exciting to see some of our writers addressing subjects around gender, around education, around the environment, that don't on paper look like they're about the Troubles. I would argue there's probably a kind of current underneath as well. I personally, I was born in 1980. I was one of the leafy green suburban Protestants as well. And yet when you peel back my story, the conflict runs through my family in different ways as well. And I would find it really hard not to engage with it, even though sometimes it's way back there in the background of my stories. It's still a subtext to everything that I write about. So yeah, I don't think it's going anywhere for a while. Michelle?
So I grew up in, like, I think what's technically known as a shithole, and I think we had like the worst. We were the economic black spot of the entire Western industrially developed world. 90% unemployment. We had the highest death rate in the Troubles for the size of our town. Like, this is the stuff we were famous for. And I think, in fairness, what am I supposed to write if I'm not writing about that? And I feel a great weight of, I feel the weight of testimony, of bearing testimony. I feel the weight of telling the stories of people who didn't make it out and telling the stories of people who don't talk anymore. I feel the weight of telling the stories that the media twisted or didn't tell or told in their way. And when I wrote Big Girls, Small Town, so it's set in a wee town in Northern Ireland, and it's set in 2004, but I wrote it in 2006 in Belfast, and like I took a month off work. I was working for the BBC at the time, and I took a month off work and I wrote 70,000 words in November, NaNoWriMo, if anybody's ever tried it. And this was really good fun to write because it's all about like a fat girl in a chipper and her granny's just been murdered and everybody wants to know who it is because the police are back and the media are back. Everybody's really excited because there's murder again. We've been missing the murder. It's 10 years since we had a bit of murder and been on the TV. But when I was writing it, every day after I'd finished writing it, because you could only write so long in a day, then I'd have to go to the pub, and it was a time when you could go to the pub and you'd be like, oh my God, Brendan, I just wrote 2,000 words. Will you stand there while I read them at you? And so I had a really good time writing this because even though there's a lot of trauma in this, even though this poor girl's uncle's been blown up, and he blew himself up, but her dad's disappeared and nobody knows why. Her mom's an alcoholic and an opioid addict, and all she wants to do is eat her fish and chips and get a ride. I was able to write this, go to the pub, talk to my friends, read bits out, and we had this brilliant thing where I'd read something and somebody go, Jesus, now I mind the time we had a wee suspect package. And, you were getting stories and giving stories, and it was brilliant. And then Factory Girls, I was living in Dublin for it, and COVID had happened, and I had an Arts Council bursary, one of these amazing things that gives you money to get babysitting, and and it was COVID, and you couldn't get babysitter. You just had to sort of give your child the internet and go, be free. And I wrote Factory Girls, and I used to go up the stairs and go in to write, and I'd say whatever to my children, they're sort of born in London, being raised in Dublin, their dad's French. And I'd go in speaking like a normal person, and then I'd come out, how are you now, children? What have you been at? Are you all right there? Are we okay? I would come out all trauma. I would come out in a state of trauma with a big Northern Irish accent, and they were always like, Michelle, what's wrong with you? And I was like, nothing at all. But Factory Girls was genuinely traumatic because I wrote it and I was alone in that world. Even though there's characters, I came out every day and I could not explain to the people I was with what I'd written about, what I'd gone through. And to the extent that my husband said, you're banned from writing about Northern Ireland ever again. And I'm kind of like, I don't know if you've ever had a dog that's vomited, and before you get to clean it up, it eats it. Yeah, no, so I'm that author. I'm just basically like, oh my God, Northern Ireland, and then, so I keep coming back to it. So I would say, very traumatic, but endless amounts of stuff to write about. I find it both hilarious and heartbreaking, and I mean that. I find this stuff so hard, and yet you can do an event and talk to people afterwards, and you get that connection that you don't get when you talk to people down south in Dublin who are like, sorry, the Troubles? What?
Well, I can definitely relate to that because nobody believes me, but that's why I work on the American Civil War, so it really is about the Troubles, so there you go. You can just sort of suppress it, it's sublimated into another whole story altogether. Well, having the chance to do all this reading in the context of this event on Northern Irish writers has been making me think about the border, the other looming subject, and how real it is in the community of writers. I was shocked one time a few years ago when I was teaching a course on 4 civil wars, and I read some Irish history for probably the first time since what was shoved into me in Form 1 and Form 2 at St. Dominic's. And I was really shocked to find out that people were writing about the history of Ireland like it had always been divided, like the partition was some natural divide, and that it had always been there. And it seemed to me that this was really, really weird. Like, scholars can have a partitioned mind. So you're writing on the other side of the partition. This is a testy subject these days, I understand. But my question is, what's the situation with respect to fiction? Has there been, is there a partition in the community of Irish writers, or has fiction been a border-crossing cultural force or element? I mean, Keelan made some comments about this at the beginning, about how uncommon it would be to have an event with Irish writers that included ones from the North and from the Republic, or the Free State, as me and Michelle call it. And I'm thinking, I'm just curious where you think we are with this. Because it seems, I mean, I don't know enough about this, but it does seem like Queen's University and the writing programs and the literature programs there were a draw for people from the Republic. So I'm just curious if you could, what does the partition mean in the world of fiction and the community of writers?
I guess I came on the scene about 10 years ago, so I've been in the kind of Irish writing community for a decade now, and I can honestly say that I felt very much like an Irish writer in that period. I started, my grandfather was an Orangeman, my dad was Presbyterian clergy. I was brought up very British, like we painted stuff red, white and blue all the time. And I was a British passport holder at that point. I'm now an Irish passport holder, and I've been on a long journey with this, and I feel very strongly now that my affinity is towards being an Irish writer. There's still a little bit of me, like if we were to lose Marks and Spencer's or something, I'd be devastated. But I feel much more part of the community there because of the graciousness and the welcome that's been shown to me. I don't think that Keelan mentioned this, but the Firestarters won the EU Prize for Literature for Ireland, and it's a book about young loyalist men. And the absolute graciousness that the Irish community decided that was the book they wanted to put forward to represent what it's like to live in Ireland now. I find that really humbling, and I wanted to make good on that. So that involves a degree of me listening as well, because it's made me aware that there are parts of the communities and experiences and narratives in places like Cork and Tipperary and Kerry that I'm not aware of, that I'm ignorant. And I've loved that. I don't know if it works in the South or not, but in the North we have two kinds of ignorance. So people will say you're ignorant or you're ignorant. Do you know what I mean? So you can be ignorant in terms of not knowing things, but you can be ignorant in how you use that kind of lack of knowledge, that you use it as a prejudice against people. And I have encountered a lot of ignorance in the South. People who'll say, well, I don't know what you do in those churches up there, or why are the DUP the way they are, or what goes on the 12th of July, and not that much ignorance. And that's been really heartening. I very strongly believe that, I don't know when there's going to be a border poll or big decisions about the future of Ireland as a whole, but I think artists have a big part to play in that process, in terms of we cannot make an informed decision about the future of the whole island unless people are aware of the experiences of everyone on the island, not just the people who shout loudest. And the people who share those experiences best are writers and filmmakers and playwrights and poets, because they create a grey space which isn't judgmental. It's just, here's the experience, come and see what it's like and make up your own mind. So that's a big kind of onus to sit under. That was all very positive. I will also say, I'm the woman with the stats. In the North, our Arts Council support is 1/5 of what they get in the South. And I think if we're going to look at having those lovely fluffy feelings about sharing and joint experiences and stuff, we have to get down to the practicalities and also make sure our artists in the North are supported the same way they are in the South, and that folks in the North have the same access to arts and culture, especially community arts, which has played such a huge role in the peace and reconciliation process. And that needs people to put money on the table. So I'll just, as a good Ballymena woman, I will stop with, can we have more money, please, and pass it back.
So I live in Dublin now, right? And my husband's French, Moroccan, my kids were born in London, and we made this decision when the kids were, well, when my oldest was about 5, we were like, where are we going to live? And I was like, we could live in Northern, no, my husband was like, we're not living in Northern Ireland. There was not even, it was a no. The schools are a big deal. They're segregated. And I said, but we could like buy a house for the price of a deposit in Belfast. No, in Dublin, no. So Northern Ireland was a no. France was a no because it's structurally racist. My husband's mixed race, my kids are mixed race. So we thought Dublin because it's, it's racist, right? But at that point, it wasn't actually like structured. They weren't very good at racism, and they were very just obvious. I'm not joking, they really were. But so I said to my husband, but are you sure now? Are you sure about this move to Dublin? Because you've never lived in Dublin, you've done the north, we've done Paris, we've done all these different places. And I said, I just don't know if you're going to fit in. And he says to me, he goes, it's going to be easier for me as a French man to fit into Ireland than it is for you as a Northern Irish person. And he was right. Oh, he was right. Having said that, we've got riots now. I don't know if you saw that, but so last Thursday, something awful happened in Dublin, and then the far right got excited and got on the thing, and they had riots. And I went on Twitter a tiny bit because I can't, as much as you can eat your own vomit, Twitter is a step too far these days. But there was an Irish academic, and I imagine that she's read books and stuff, and she said, her tweet was, oh my God, I can't believe that we've seen riots in Ireland like this. I never thought I'd live to see riots in Ireland. I was right. Now, this is why you don't go on Twitter, Michelle. When we talk about blindness, it seems so complete. I haven't read every book that anybody ever wrote in Ireland. Sure, who would do that? But anyway, AI might one day, because I am waiting for the day that AI tells me, Michelle, an Irish writer from the other side of the border referenced the Oma bomb. I'm waiting for...
It's in my next novel.
Brilliant. There's my number one. But it is...
Which, sorry, can I say I've read, and it's very, very good.
No, but
Belinda
that's...
McKeown. Yeah. Belinda McKeown is, I think, one of the only Southern novelists who
referenced it. For context, it's kind of our 9/11 in terms of population size, in terms of people killed. And I find that we aren't in Irish literature in a way that it was almost like I had to really study how to be Irish, to pass that test of being Irish. And I never will, because I grew up in Northern Ireland. And I find that really hard. And I think one of the big things we have going on in Ireland is being able to expand our idea of what Irish is. It needs to include people like my kids who weren't born there, but who could choose from 4 passports, chose the Irish passport. And yet when my cousin was trapped in a bar in Sinnets on Friday night, I couldn't send my husband out because he wouldn't have been safe on the streets of Dublin, the city that we've chosen to move to. As a European, he wasn't going to be safe. I don't know if Lucy wants, we've both talked about this before, about how Northern Irish writers, it's a welcoming community, it is supportive. They've also almost got a quota on what is acceptable in terms of Northern Irish people coming and being at events and talking at events, and there's a sense of other when we are the presence. Lucy, do you want to? Yeah.
Yeah, I edited an anthology of new Irish short stories for Faber a couple of years ago. I called it Being Various, and that comes from a line from McNeice again, a poem by McNeice called Snow that I think should be Northern Ireland's national anthem. And the lines in Snow go, I peel and portion a tangerine and spit the pips and feel the drunkenness of things being various. And due to the Good Friday Agreement, I have both passports. I grew up, my father is from an Ulster Protestant background. My mum's English Catholic from Bristol via Cork. And so I was raised in East Belfast, which tends to be sort of majority Protestant, but not going to church. In fact, my whole writing life, it's bemused and kind of perplexed me and kind of amused me sometimes when I get described as a Protestant writer, because I think, actually, I think I'm Buddhist in my spirituality, So the Good Friday Agreement allowed writers to hold a British passport and to hold an Irish passport. Actually, I would incline, I think of myself as Northern Irish. I'm a very particular, maybe, age and section of the population that thinks in my introduction to Being Various, I talk about how neither passport seems to fully represent me, the way that I feel. I feel fraudulent or deceptive, whichever one I'm using, depending on where I'm going or who I'm traveling with. I find it amusing sometimes if you check in somewhere with a British passport, people's reaction to you, you check in with an Irish passport, completely different reaction, you know. And I'm interested, when I was editing Being Various, I was interested in completely breaking open the Irish canon and what it meant to be an Irish writer. When I signed my first book deal, my sisters made me a card. I don't know if you can see this. This is the famous sepia tone postcard of Ireland's writers that you can still get for sale. You know, I saw it in Galway a year ago, and it's got Singh and Joyce and Swift and Oscar Wilde, and they found a very studious-looking picture of me with a sort of very severe fringe and thick glasses, and stuck me on below Oscar Wilde's shoulder and Tippexed in my name. And you know, we kind of thought this was hilarious. And I had this on my desk, you know, every study I was working in. And then you start to think, okay, so where are the women? You know, where's Mary Lavin? Where's Kate O'Brien? Where's Anne Enright? Where's Edna O'Brien? Where's And you start thinking, where are the women? And then from there, it's not far to think, okay, well, what does make a writer Irish? When I was editing Being Various, I wanted to have a good representation of women, of writers from the North. I also wanted to have, I opened the book with an amazing story by a Chinese-born writer, superstar in China, who married a Dublin man, moved to Dublin, had a baby, was living in Dublin, raising her baby, writing in Irish. She delivered such a phenomenal story that I opened the anthology with it. I have a story in that anthology as well, by the writer Kit Duvall, who's born in England to one Irish parent, one Jamaican parent. You know, what does that version of Irishness look like? I have a story by someone who came to Ireland as an asylum seeker, as a refugee from Nigeria. I also have a story by a Finnish-born writer who moved to Ireland in her 20s, married an Irishman, had 3 kids, divorced the Irishman, decided to stay on in Ireland. She's now in her 60s, and she says, my anthology was the first time anyone had asked her to be something as an Irish writer rather than as a Finnish writer. And she thinks she's Finnish by accident of birth. She left Finland before she was 21. She spent her whole life in Ireland. You know, so my anthology tried to break it open. You know, what does make a writer Irish, and how do we? And I think it's an interesting thing when you think of Irish diaspora, and so many of you I know will feel such strong Irish ties. And if you have one Irish grandparent, you're entitled to the passport. You know, you can come and live in the... So sort of teasing open what it means to be an Irish writer is something that I've been very interested in.
Amazing. I mean, normally for an hour's event, I would create about 16, 18 questions for writers. Stephanie and I together created about 9, and we've got through 6, and we're well over the hour. And so I want to open up to audience questions now. I mean, we have questions remaining. We're very worked over, but we'll be magnanimous here. And just to ask you to keep it reasonably brief, because as you can tell, these women have many wonderful things to say. There's a microphone just in the center there. Yeah, we've got one brave person. No, there's no problem if
well
there
done,
aren't
it's
questions.
quite something being the first one to do that big walk.
Well, first off, thank you all for coming tonight and speaking. It's been really interesting. You mentioned at the beginning that it's been a new thing, kind of that there's been this resurgence, or not resurgence, but a vocalization of women writers in the north of Ireland. And I'm wondering if you could speak to something that was an instigator, or why there's been this kind of rise of women writers. So thank you.
Do you want to take one thing each? I will say the kind of stunning combo of Milkman plus Dairy Girls. Whenever Milkman won the Booker Prize, it was an amazing moment for us, because Anna really shone a light on a narrative that hadn't been explored very much, and that was young teenage girls. Teenage girls are often kind of, you know, neglected or kind of portrayed as silly and not relevant. And yet Milkman is one of the most stunning depictions of the conflict that I think we have, and most accurate as well. And then hot on the heels of that, we had Dairy Girls, where Lisa McGee was saying, you know what, I want to go even further with what teenage girls experienced. And I think that both of those did reasonably well. So I think that opened up both the narrative for women to speak, but also for other marginalised voices. So there's been a lot more writing from the queer community about what the perspective was there during the conflict. Wonderful writers like Carina Doherty who are looking at kind of nature and the environment and conflict. So that was my reason. I'll hand it over, and you got a different one?
I think the writers have always been there, you know, and I think anthologies like Sinead Gleeson edited a beautiful anthology called The Long Gaze Back. And I had a story in that anthology, as did Jan. And you suddenly think, here's four. Oh, you were in the next one. You were in the next one. And suddenly there were 400 years of women with stories that seem to speak to each other. And the wonderful thing that happens when you're anthologizing, and one of the reasons that anthologies are important, is that you have a story that your stories seem to talk to each other across the generations. And as a writer, I think you always make your own chronologies. You know, you find your own foremothers. But there's something about seeing all of those writers there together in that anthology that felt so important that Sinead then went on to edit another anthology of specifically northern women writers as well. And I think that's part of the work as well, thinking there have always been women writers. We have so many writers who are uncelebrated and under-celebrated. But the thing that happens when something like Milkman or Dairy Girls is such a deserved success, that there's suddenly room for more, and there's the appetite for more, and the light shines on more.
Yeah, I mean, my thing is they just didn't publish us. Like, it was 10 years before I got publisher. You were like going, hey, I've written this thing, it's really great. And they're like, yeah, you know, we don't do troubles literature. They're like, literally, people are saying we don't do troubles literature. I think they had an idea of what would sell, and I know we've already talked about Liam Neeson, and I hope he's not here tonight, but it was always like Liam Neeson with, you know, a gun looking sweaty, running around with a bomb taken somewhere, you know, that's what they wanted. There's all the other narratives. And I honestly believe if I put Liam Neeson into one of my books, it would have got, my manuscript would have been out there faster, you know.
We've got one other question. Maybe just before this question, can I ask? You had to do a glossary, I believe, for your book.
For the American
edition? For the American audience. How did it go? Is there any gossip?
I loved doing the glossary, and I got to work with my not oldest best friend, but my friend who's been my friend for such a long time, and me and my brother and her got to work together on what did Thran really mean, and how do you really pronounce Wayne, and is Cuddy with a double T or a double D, and I loved doing the glossary, and it is one of the most clicked pages on my website, rather than the buy your book. They're all like, how do you? So yeah, it was great.
Michelle, I have to say that reading your book was unbelievable for me, like turning on the TV one Boxing Day in Toronto and Dairy Girls came on. I had never heard Northern Irish accents like that on TV, and I was with my sisters, and I just looked and I said, what the hell is that? And we all stood there transfixed because the crazy way people talk. Like, does your glossary... Keelan used a word a few weeks ago. She said, she's a wee dote. And I hadn't heard that word in 15 years. Now, do you have to define dote in your glossary? Like, you couldn't. I would be hard-pressed to write a glossary of Northern Irish words.
Because then dote and doten are two completely different things.
See, Dairy Girls was easy because you only had to have subtitles.
Yeah.
That's just what your glossary's there for.
There was one very bad subtitle though in Dairy Girls when one of the characters says the character does not say he loves the whole of me. She doesn't mean he loves my entire self.
Auto-generated subtitles are like, yeah.
So ladies, first of all, thank you. It's been incredibly funny and enlightening. I'm a child of Dublin that grew up in the 60s, 70s, and the 80s. It was a long childhood. And my memories of the North, which we never went to, was of dour or angry men on the other side of the border. So what my question is about humor, which we have seen in spades this evening. Is that simply the whole province of women of Northern Ireland? And is it to compensate for the pathetically unable to be funny men?
I just say, I will say, whenever I used to get the bus from Galway up to Belfast for the 5 years I was living there, I would just be gagging to get to Belfast and get on a bus and listen to women on the bus. It's just it's so entertaining. There's nothing more entertaining than that. So there's something to be said for women. And
but I think there's a serious thing, right? Humor is a coping mechanism, right? It's a way of distancing yourself from something terrible, and so I know that my books are darkly humorous. They're outrightly humorous, but also darkly humorous. And it very much is, I grew up in a place where we used humor to cope, and still do, and to deflect, and to maybe, you know, the way, like, when you have your therapist and they're always like, you know, if you're trying to make me laugh, you're not doing the work. And I'm going, oh, Jesus, you're not my audience. But when I won the Comedy Women in Print Awards, because my family, nobody believes me. Like, this reporter said, you're making this up, but like, I have 6 brothers and sisters, and we've, you know, a WhatsApp group, and Mummy and Daddy are on it, and I swear to God, it's the funniest thing going. And when I won the Comedy Women in Print Award, you know, I announced it in the family WhatsApp group, expecting somebody to say something nice. And my brother goes, I don't know how you won a prize for being funny when you're not even the funniest person in our house. Which is true. And it's this kind of verbal, the way that you meet someone, and, you know, if someone comes up to you all serious, and they come up to you all sad, and they come up to you whatever, you have to get them to stop taking themselves seriously. You have to get them laughing. You have to get them out of themselves. So
Can I?
my brother thinks he's funny.
Can I speak about the Durness? Because I represent the Dur contingent over here. And yeah, oh no, Dar and Dur is entirely different things. And I do think it's really depressing. Like, there is a real Dur joylessness about particularly Protestant evangelicalism. It's not funny. And I think you're going to see a lot of people talking about this in the next wee while. There's been an awful lot of talk of what went on in the Catholic Church. And there is a lot to be said for what went on in the Protestant Church. And yes, I'm sure there is abuse similar to what went on in the Catholic Church, but the biggest thing that I've struggled with is the utter joylessness of the way that I was brought up, and how difficult it is to begin to, like, you know, I still can't dance. I literally could drink 6 pints and I can't get my body to move.
That's a challenge, people.
Yeah. And I'm really sad about that. Like, muscle memory lasts for a long time, and to be brought... Some of you know what I'm talking about, because there's the same strand of evangelical fundamentalism in America, and you'll want to thank us for, because we were actually the ones who brought that out here. So there you go. That muscle memory thing of learning how to laugh, how to enjoy your body, how to enjoy other people, and you know, how to enjoy life. That takes healing as well as some of the physical trauma stuff. So the women, I always say Derry Girls is hilarious, but wait till you see Protestant Mothers, because that is the sitcom that we need to show you just how dire it can get on that side of things.
Yeah, Jan has a really beautiful, really moving essay that she wrote for Kevin Barry and Olivia Smith's publication, Winter Papers, the anthology, annual anthology, exactly about that you should really seek out and read. Yeah, there's something, Michelle and I have both talked about this with Anna Burns, about, you know, you grow up in a place where the biggest insult you can possibly level at someone is to say, you know, she loves herself. Yeah. You know, you grow up in a place where joy or love, or, you know, the humor is there, a very dark humor, coping mechanism, but it's a very hard thing, I think, to get from a place where joy is not something.
Yeah, no, I don't think that humor and joy are the same thing, and like, joy to me is a very different thing, and I know that I definitely had a lot of joy as a kid, but not necessarily in church or school settings, or even, yeah, I mean, sometimes with family stuff, but I do know that an awful lot of the conversations we had were really, they were, they were almost honed to that point where, you know, you were waiting for somebody to have a punchline somewhere, no matter how sad or dark or whatever it was. You were keeping it going. Somebody somewhere was going to punch in with something funny, and then you'd be let off the hook. And I was up in Fela and Phobal, I think, was talking about this earlier in the summertime, and it was one of the really interesting things that I loved about being there, was how people were storytelling in this way that you literally have to listen really actively and be really aware, because one minute you're being told something hilarious and the next minute, you know, the person was saying, and then they were blown up, and you're just trying to go, okay, so what's the appropriate line to hold here? And I suppose actually it's more like life. There's just that roller coaster.
Thank you so much for being here this evening. I nearly didn't attend, but my partner talked me into it, and I owe him a drink. I grew up in the Virgin Islands, and then I grew up in the American South in Louisiana, and along the way I've realized the stories of communities and people that have been othered and may not have had the language to communicate that feeling provides a certain level of familiarity and comfort, a weird comfort. And I think that's the basis of my question, I guess, is how has your relationship with your Irishness evolved as you've written, and do you think that your writing has reflected that evolution in any way?
I can talk about this really quickly. I only started writing when I was 25. I moved to Portland in Oregon for 4 years and told a big lie and told everyone I was a writer and I was kind of a big deal at home, which you shouldn't do that, because very quickly they started to ask, can we see your writing? So my first 4 years, I basically emulated, if you can imagine this, a mashup between Richard Brautigan and Raymond Carver, because early writers, that's what you do. You just copy the people that you love. It's all very American. And then my visa ran out and I got sent back, not to Belfast, which would have been cool, but to my spare bedroom in my parents' house in Ballymena to work selling candles in the Tower Centre, age 30, which was grim. And I really didn't want to be there, but I slowly began to write stories about Northern Ireland, and I can honestly say that close attention to detail and looking at people and listening to them on the bus, and also trying to see the subcontext of what people had been through and how that made them sometimes a bit annoying. It made me fall in love with the place that I live now and call home, and I can see its faults. Michelle saying she was born in a shithole. Belfast's a shithole too. It's falling apart at the minute, but I love it, and I think I love the people there, and writing really gave that back to me. So I'm very grateful that you just took my visa off me and sent me home.
Yeah, I think that my sense of myself as Irish and my sense of myself as a writer are really intimately bound up because I applied for my first Irish passport as I was writing my first novel at university. And I was writing the novel and people would say to me, what's your novel about? And they would assume they knew what it was before I'd finished saying, this is just after Good Friday Agreement in the early 2000s. And so my sense then of myself as Irish, and my sense of myself as a writer, and my sense of the stories that I wanted to tell kind of grew together. And for a long time I felt there's the great Ulster poet John Hewitt. He has a famous essay called The Bitter Gourd, and in it he says, a poet must be rooted in the soil, in his native soil, otherwise he's an airy internationalist, he's nothing, he's thistledown. And for the longest time I felt I hadn't moved back to Belfast, so what right did I have to be a Belfast writer? What right did I have to be an Irish writer? And then gradually I realised, especially when I was writing my stories of tea in Belfast, my first collection is called Multitudes, and it's stories of teenage East Belfast. And what I realised is, had I been living in Belfast, I couldn't have written those stories. Maybe I would have written other stories, but the past, because it hadn't been overlaid by new quotidian memories, it was still there. It was still accessible to me in really vital ways. And so it's an interesting position to find yourself in, to think, I could only write that book because I was no longer living there, because I had moved away. And in terms of a lot of my writing, I was talking at lunch earlier today, it tends to be set in airplanes, in airport departure lounges, and there's something I think that's particular to a sense of diasporic living in the 21st century, where it used to be a couple of generations ago, you would go away and that would be it, you'd never come back. Maybe you come back once in a lifetime. And then say maybe a generation or two further on, you'd go, but you could come back for significant family events. But the age that we live in, you can go back and forth across the Atlantic, you can go back to the Virgin Islands and back, you can go, and so you have a different and strange relationship between places, because it's very possible to feel not quite of one place or the other, or to feel torn between places. And so I think my sense of Irishness is very much bound up with those things of having left Ireland as an 18-year-old, and though when I go back to the house my parents moved into when I was 11. But I've never lived there as an adult with my own family. So, but I think these things that we see as defects can be possibilities too.
My dad's dad was born in Philadelphia and then moved back to Ireland when everybody in the family died except his ma. God love them. But they all died and they buried them all. It was a flu pandemic. And then she went back home and the priest took her in and he got raised in the priest's house with his mum. And my mum's dad was a British soldier and he spent 5 years in a prisoner of war camp. Then came home to his Irish wife who'd had a nervous breakdown and decided the best thing they could do with their trauma was make babies and pass the trauma on. I grew up with like family all over the place, and I had an uncle, a priest in Louisiana, in Thibodeau. Tell you, he was an exorcist. And we only found this out, right? No, this is very important. You see, I always thought of him as my American uncle, because like another uncle here in New York, and he was kind of in between. He didn't want to leave Ireland, he had to leave. And but the priest, you have to go where you're sent, and he ended up, he did a wee stint in New Orleans, and then he ended up in Thibodeau, and we didn't know he was an exorcist until it was his funeral, and there was like 10 priests burying him, and I was like, are they trying to make sure he's dead or what? So I had this family that were all over the place, but I think the thing that really is about my writing is the storytelling, right? I mean, like when you say you have an uncle, a priest in Louisiana in Thibodeau who was an exorcist and it took 10 priests to bury him, that's a novel. And when am I going to write that? So, but it's stories, and for me, being Irish is that big feeling of connection right across the world. And what I want Ireland to do is grow up and wise up. But for all the people that are coming to Ireland, for the 1 in 5 who weren't born on the island, who live there now, for the 1 in 4 in the workforce who weren't born in Ireland, who are now powering our workforce, and this crack with the riots, sort it out, So
Thank y'all so much. I appreciate y'all.
I'm just going to check with Eileen before we find out whether we can take one last question. We can? Okay, great.
Hi, it's not really a question, it's more of a thank you. This has been amazing. It's a long story. Lucy and I went to school together. She was top of her English class. I was bottom of the English class. And we were allowed to sit together simply because she would teach me what to do and I would paint her nails. We did that for 2 years. I now live in New York, but why I wanted to speak and why I'm so interested about this is the conversation you had today about are you Irish, are you Northern Irish? I've literally never had that conversation in my life with anyone, certainly never in New York, no one in the States. I have 2 daughters, one was born in Dublin, one was born in Manhattan, and they're Irish through and through and tell everyone they're Irish, and they're so proud of this, and I don't know what to say when people ask me. And I go to the airport and depending on who's there, I'll use one passport or another, and people say, oh, you're Irish, and I'd say, yeah, further north, but yeah. And then my husband is from a Catholic family from Derry. He calls himself Irish. He won't use the British passport. And I'm there in the wrong queue in the airport with the British passport. And the whole thing is so confusing. And this conversation has never happened before. I certainly have never been privy to this. And it's fabulous. And the fact that it's happening in Columbia University is amazing. So it's not really a question. It was more of a thank you. I'm grateful for your time and for your intelligence and everything that you brought to this. It's really fabulous. And it's amazing that women from Belfast or Northern Ireland have been able to come and do this. I love it.
Kelly, amazing. And I mean, state of my nails. I need your French manicures. Kelly would always do the most brilliant French tips and French manicures. But this is exactly, we are talking, Northern Ireland is a country that is younger than my grandmother. My grandmother died a couple of years ago, and Northern Ireland as a country, it's one of those strange things where you think probably Northern Ireland will cease to be a country within my lifetime. You know, reunification, the partition was a disaster, should never have happened. The country will be reunified, but we need to have these conversations. And exactly as Jan said, that's one of the places where writers can start having those conversations and can start honouring the complexity of all these different narratives, you know, and honour and create the space for such a variety of different Irishnesses, of which there is no hierarchy, you know. Kelly, thank you. It's amazing to see you, and yeah, I'd love you to do my nails again after, but thank you.
Did anyone else want to respond to that, or? All right.
I'll just say as well as, like, please do buy Irish writers, but I think we also need to make sure that we're not an echo chamber too. And like, one of the joys of being a European laureate has been having conversations with other writers from what people like to call complicated places. And there's so much to be learnt from being in other places that have issues with identity and complex identity and history of conflict and division. And I would like to see more of that happening as well. It's great to have conversations with other Irish writers, but community, in my view, is always looking outwards, and it's looking to learn from other people. So it's great to be here. I think I'm really hoping that we have some of those conversations with folks who've had different experiences growing up from us, and that we get lots more opportunities to have those chats.
Just before a round of applause, I'll say that the books are available. If you haven't been sold, I don't know who could sell you anything. And I think the authors are going to be happy to sign books. So at the back of the room. So I think it's just been such a privilege to hear these authors speak together. And thank you so much for turning up for it.